Hello and welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pishota, and a happy Friday to you. This is a Friday night podcast just because of the flurry of Mets moves that were made today. And by flurry, I mean this was things done, but nothing that's really going to blow anyone's minds. David Stearns continued what was clearly his quests at the beginning of this offseason, which was bring in players uh, who were low risk, potentially high reward options, particularly in the bullpen, and bringing in guys who had not really experienced a ton of success in 2023, but he's betting on have the talent and could be potentially pretty productive for the Mets in 2024. So we have the announced signing of Jake Diekman, the left-handed reliever, pitched most recently for the Chicago White Sox, and we saw him also last year with the Tampa Bay Rays. And there's a lot of talent with Diekman. He showed that when he appeared with the with the Rays, um, in the 50 appearances that he made for Tampa Bay last season, he had a 2.18 ERA, 53 strikeouts in 45 and a thirds innings, only 25 walks, which is not great, but pretty much right on par of his entire career. He's never had great control, but has excellent stuff. And has experienced a lot of success over his career. His 11.4 strikeout per 9 innings ratio for his career. This is a guy who has great stuff and can be potentially impact arm in that bullpen. And his addition to what was already like a pretty solid group is just one move. They also recently re-signed Adam Ottavino. Ottavino coming back for 1 year, and Ottavino is going to take a lot of flack for what was a pretty botched negotiation on his part, or the part of his agents. He had the option to return to the Mets with a $6.5 million option. He declined, and ultimately re-signed for $4.5 million. He's going to hear about it for probably the remainder of his career. Just a pretty stupid move on his part, but we're glad to see Ottavino back. Ottavino's return gives them a pretty solid group late innings, particularly if we have a healthy Edwin Diaz, and all signs appear to be that Diaz is ready to go. He was on the cusp of returning late in the year in 2023, before the Mets ultimately finally just shut him down because they weren't going anywhere. So Edwin Diaz should be ready to go in 2024. I don't see a reason why he wouldn't make the opening day lineup, or sorry, roster, with unless there's some kind of as of now unforeseen problem that he experiences, and we're hoping that he's going to stay healthy for the time forward. And this was that season-ending injury was just a kind of a blip in his career because Diaz coming back healthy and looking like the pitcher that they had in 2022 is going to be a big part of it. Diaz's loss kind of put the Mets behind the eight ball, so to speak. They had to rely a lot on Adam Ottavino as the closer. I think that was part of the reason why Ottavino declined his option, because he saw there was potentially a chance that he could catch on as a closer on another team. But I'm not sure what the issue was exactly. Ottavino just didn't get a lot of interest. After what was a pretty successful season, he stepped in, recorded 12 saves for the Mets, had 3.21 ERA, 62 strikeouts, and 61 in two-thirds innings. The control kind of went back up after what was a kind of an outlier year in 2022. He struggled a lot in 2023 with his control, but ultimately was pretty strong for the Mets. And uh, people, I guess, saw the age. They saw probably the problems of his control and whether or not he could really be expected to be a full-time closer, which I don't really think Ottavino can be at this point in his career. He's more suited to be a setup man. Um, that said, he joins what is a good group here with the previously mentioned Diekman. They also have Brooks Raley. Raley was excellent for the Mets last year, and was probably was one of, along with Ottavino, one of the real bright spots of that bullpen. That was it was expected to be Rayleigh and Ottavino in the setup role leading up to Diaz last year. Now it's probably going to be something of the similar sort, with Diekman also being used. And the way that the Mets are going to be able to deploy two left-handed relievers, two guys with great stuff, and guys who can be very effective over their careers. They've shown they can be very effective over their careers. It's going to be an impressive addition to this team, and I'm looking at it. It's actually a pretty solid group, and I'm very impressed. They also announced the signing of Shintaro Fujinami. Fujinami signing a 1 year, $3.35 million deal. For those who aren't familiar with Fujinami, he was from Japan. He had signed with the Oakland Athletics on a 1 year deal last year. He was struggled significantly as a starter. They moved him over to the bullpen and then ultimately traded him to Baltimore, where he had a little bit more success at Baltimore, but still had some struggles. He was with Baltimore 2-0 with a 4.85 ERA in 30 appearances. So there is this is another one of David Stearns's. I'm going to kind of throw my hat in the ring and say this guy has a potential to be very effective if he can harness what is his biggest issue, which is he does not have a ton of control. It was probably the biggest setback for him in his debut season in the major leagues. He was all over the place, and it's probably one of the biggest killers of Japanese pitchers. Then when they do arrive in Major League Baseball, if they do not have the control, it can be really puts you behind in terms of what you can do as a reliever. That said, excellent stuff. 83 strikeouts at 79 innings pitched. That was pretty clear. This guy had the potential to be really impressive, and he showed that it was primarily a bullpen role. He has a fastball tops out about 99 miles an hour. He can really be something of a surprise addition to that team in middle relief if he is indeed going to make the opening day roster. And I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Mets uniform in spring training and seeing what he can do. The trick will be for the Mets to see if they can figure out what is his biggest drawback in terms of what's affecting his control. If they can figure that out, he's like 6'6", 180 pounds. He's like long, tall, lean guy who, if he's throwing this like high 90s fastball, it could be pretty effective. I'm really interested to see what they do with him. And Stearns has a history of being able to find these guys and being able to turn them into really quality relievers. He's got his eyes on a lot of different pitchers, and he's been playing it pretty cautious and patient for the most part of this offseason. People have been pretty upset, myself included, that Stearns hasn't really approached this the way that we're used to seeing Mets GMs approach it, which was Billy Epler's style. When Billy Epler was always going after the big game. He was always going after the top free agents and making big name headline deals. Stearns very much the opposite. Stearns is I'm going to play this as stealthy as possible and go after guys that people aren't really expecting because I know these guys have the potential to be super effective. Stearns' method isn't 100% effective. He is, sometimes wrong. Nobody's correct all the time. But he has a body of work that has led to great success over the years when he was with the Milwaukee front office, and I fully believe that this is a strong move for them. And I'm looking at the bullpen. It's like I said, a pretty solid crew, particularly if you have Edwin Diaz at the head of it, and so you have, uh, as I mentioned before, Ottavino, Diekman, uh, Rayleigh, and Fujinami. You also have these guys, Drew Smith, and Mets fans all know Drew Smith's struggles, and he'll be kind of like a guy who is either there or he's not there. And a lot of times last season he was not there for the Mets. So Drew Smith certainly a guy who's a bit of a question mark. We don't really know what to expect from Drew Smith, but we know he can step into middle relief and be at least somewhat effective for the most part. Phil Bickford and Jorge Lopez, these are the other two guys that have been tapped and to be parts of the Mets bullpen in 2024. Both guys coming off bad years, and again, there's potential. Bickford was at one point considered a really like big prospect in LA, and they saw him as a guy who could be a late innings, maybe even a future closer for that group with the Dodgers. And he just kind of all spiraled and fell apart for him pretty quickly. And the Mets are hoping he has a little bit more of that left in him. Jorge Lopez, guy who was an All Star in 2022 with Baltimore. Um, there's he's the guy. He's a veteran. He's bounced around. If nothing else, the guy provides leadership and is, from all accounts, pretty good in that regard. And they're hoping that he can kind of give the Mets a little bit more of a veteran role and hopefully help that middle relief, which was a big issue last year. The Mets middle relief was god awful for large portions of the season, and I've enjoying what Stearns is giving them right now. It's the potential is there. He's certainly making risky moves. Things could blow up in his face. It's his first year as the GM. He hasn't responded to that in the way that most people have. Like, for example, Billy Epler, who was focused on making clear that he was going to go after the top free agents and make exciting trades and stuff like that. Stearns has been like, I know I have job security. Nothing's going to happen here. I'm going to be playing this pretty cautious. And people can see it as, kind of maybe even cowardly. I don't. I see it as a guy who has a very clear idea as to what he wants to do as the Mets general manager, or actually rather president of baseball operations. And he sees this role as, I'm going to kind of mold this, not just the big league lineup, but also the front office in what I want them to be. And what he did in Milwaukee, he thinks he can replicate here in New York. He has the financial resources of Steve Cohen to go after major guys, but because there aren't a lot of major guys to go after, he's been playing this very close to his chest, and he's being very cautious as to what he wants to go after. And he's not going after top free agents, although the Mets were involved in obviously the pursuits of Yamamoto, but that was really kind of a one off, and I actually don't think Stearns was actually that serious about it. I think he knew that Yamamoto was most likely going to LA and was going to play for the Dodgers, and he wasn't going to devote that much energy to it, but he was going to do what Steve Cohen bid him to do, and just try and make an offer and try and get him to New York. But Stearns has, for the most part, been playing it like this. It's been small moves. It's been moves to help the depth and moves of bringing in veterans and players who are not quite considered elite players, but have the potential to be pretty solid if things swing the right way for them. So it's been an off season where people have gotten frustrated. I've certainly been frustrated that it just felt like weeks and weeks would go by with nothing really happening. And for anyone following the podcast, I'm just kind of like spinning my wheels a lot of times. I'm waiting for things to happen, and nothing's happening. It's been a pretty boring off season for the most part, particularly in contrast to the last off season. But you know what? Last off season was really exciting, and the season was ultimately a miss. The Mets struggled a lot. It was pretty boring for the most part. So maybe a boring offseason can give sort of the opposite effects to the season. Maybe we're looking at a potential wild card team that can. I'm not going to say throw down with teams like the Braves and maybe even the Phillies, but they could definitely be in the mix-up and for one of those wild card spots with the Marlins and other teams in the National League. So I don't think and it's players that are going to have to kind of play at a better rate. Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso. Those are the main leaders of that lineup. They need them to step up the same way that the Mets are hoping that guys like Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos can potentially step up. We still haven't seen the Mets go after a DH, as far as we know. There's been talks, but nothing really materializing as of yet. So I think that would be one last piece. I would love for them to go out and acquire a guy who can be more of a full-time DH rather than relying on, part-time players or guys like Mark Vientos, who people are kind of hoping he can be great. I'm not going to throw all of my cards into him at the moment, but I see the potential with Vientos, but I would rather than bring in a quality veteran for that position. So if if Stearns is done building his bullpen, it seems like that the acquisition of Diekman and Ottavino and Fujinami are the last pieces that he's putting into this. Then maybe he still has a little bit left in him to go after a designated hitter and bring that one last piece to the puzzle for 2024.
Thank you for listening to the Mike Smith's podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike Smith's Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.